Today's speaker, Denise Harrison, the Executive Vice President and Chief Operating Officer of the Center for Simplified Strategic Planning, will be presenting her findings based on working with hundreds of companies on strategic planning and strategic alignment. Denise brings a wealth of hands-on experience to this subject. Prior to joining the Center for Simplified Strategic Planning, Denise worked for a Fortune 500 company holding a variety of positions, including president of one of their divisions, and then moved to president of a financial services firm. Denise, can you share with us why you find strategic alignment to be such a key element to a company's success?
Thanks, Tom. Well, as Tom has just mentioned, I was president of a financial services firm, and I had just had an employee survey taken, and I was totally frustrated. We had had a terrific year. Well, you know, I was brought in to become president about 2 years prior to this, and the firm was not doing well. The firm, you typically don't bring in new presidents when things are going well, so my job was to turn the situation around, and there was a lot of good news. After 2 years, we had wonderful results. We had developed more profit in this last year than the company had in its whole prior existence. We were back hiring folks. We were back giving bonuses, and of course, I thought this was a great time to give, to have an employment survey. And we asked our employees the typical employee survey questions, and everything was really good. But on this survey, I asked 2 additional questions. 1, do you know what our strategy is? And 2, do you know what you need to do in your job to support the strategy? So, as I mentioned, good news, the survey came back, people were happy, they felt they had a long-term career with the company, they were excited about our potential. The bad news, when we asked the question about did they understand the strategy, the answer was no. And then, of course, if you don't understand the strategy, it's hard to know what you have to do in your job in order to support it. And I was frustrated. I went to my human resources vice president and I said, Susan, what can we do? I don't understand. I feel like I'm communicating a lot. And she looked at me and said, I don't understand either, because you do communicate a lot, and certainly you communicate much more than they've ever been communicated to before. I said, what can we do? So let me tell you what we had been doing. After we developed the strategic plan, I would get up in front of the company and present the strategic plan. But then I would set aside 2 days every quarter in order to review the plan with small groups of 8. So people would sign up in groups of 8, and I would spend about 20 minutes reviewing the strategic plan and then reviewing what we accomplished that quarter and what we needed to accomplish the next quarter. So that was a lot of communication. First, a big company communication, and then second, quarterly communication in small groups so people would feel comfortable asking questions. But apparently it wasn't working, and we actually needed to do more. So let me make a long story short. Here's what we decided to do. Once again, the senior management team developed the strategy, and we presented it to the rest of the company. At the end of this presentation, we then asked each department to develop presentations for the next month that they would get up and present to the rest of the company what their department was doing in support of the strategy. Well, the departments went off and worked busily. The managers, of course, were wringing their hands. They were not comfortable that people would come up with good ideas. But they worked with their departments, and lo and behold, the next month came. And each department got up. They chose a spokesperson. They chose their PowerPoint background and their fonts, and they got up and proudly discussed what they were going to do in support of the strategy. Do you think they came up with better ideas than we did? Of course, because in their individual departments, they knew even better what they needed to do in support of the strategy. In addition to that, they came up with metrics to show how they were achieving and making progress. And the metrics they came up with were stringent. And had we, as a senior management team, come up with the same metrics, they would have been perceived as cruel and unusual punishment. So here we were very successful in turning the company around, but I found in the next years we moved forward even more quickly because everyone was on board. People knew what they had to do. And this presentation was very motivating because they wanted to do what they said they were going to do in front of their peers, and so the senior management team didn't need to do as much tracking. So just to review, as CEO of the financial services firm, I communicated the strategy and did it in small groups too. But I found after the employee survey, we in fact were not measuring up. In order to change it, we asked for two-way communication. So after communicating the strategy, we asked each department to make presentations. And in this way, they developed their thinking about what they needed to do in support of the strategy. And in this way, we got buy-in, and we were much more successful. So this is a pretty easy way to get strategic alignment. But I found after working with many of my strategic planning teams that people wanted more, and while this does give you a lot of buy-in, they were looking to get this alignment even deeper and deeper knowledge within the organization and get people starting to think strategically. So this was a developmental opportunity. So I worked with a number of my teams on a strategic alignment program, and here are 4 of the modules we found most effective. Now, first, I'll tell you, every one of our strategic alignment meetings started out with a presentation of the overall strategy, goals, and objectives or strategic initiatives so that people understood the big picture. After this presentation, we then allowed people to get into their department groups, so they were starting to think on a departmental level and relate to the strategy. And here's the first of the 4 modules that we presented. The first module was, who are our customers? So we asked every department who they thought their customers were. So not the same question you deal with in your strategic planning, which is who are the company's customers, and then segmenting them by needs and preferences. This was a similar question, but it was based on who the department served. So in some cases, it could have been external customers, so they could have similar things to strategic planning, but a lot of times there were many internal departments that they served, but they often didn't think of these people as customers. We want them to think of their internal counterparts as customers, not as a pain. And we want them to start thinking about this from their customer's point of view, to get their heads in the game and to broaden their concept of the team. So how do you do this? We asked them to list their customers that they serve and to think about, if they had trouble with it, to think about if your department just disappeared, who would really be having problems, who really relies on you for information or the service that you provide. So list those customers, and they might be both internal and external customers. And then think through, in a perfect world, what do these customers want? And how could we, in our department, become better service providers? Well, this started forcing people to think from a totally different point of view. And let me give you some examples of the types of things that came out. One finance group was dealing with a lot of ad hoc requests from the customer service group, and it was just a pain. And they just was taking a lot of time. And often the requests were the same question asked over and over again. But when they started thinking of the customer service department as rather than a pain than as a customer, they asked the department, well, what is the information you need on a regular basis, and is there a better way to provide it to you? Well, in fact, both teams got together and designed a report that allowed the customer service people to see where a particular order was in the process and whether or not there was a credit hold on this order, so that when customers called in, rather than running to the finance department for this information, they now had it at their fingertips, and they were able to print out new reports every morning. This way, they stopped all the ad hoc requests, and that made the finance department happy, but they also were giving better customer service to their customers because they had the information at their fingertips. An IT group saw a similar problem. The salespeople were frustrated that their emails just weren't getting to customers very quickly. And they would send an email out and then follow up with a phone call and find that the customers hadn't even received the email yet. And of course they were told, well, that's just a system constraint. But when the IT department started thinking about the customer service group as a customer, they realized while it was a system constraint, it was a constraint that could be changed, and that we could batch out our emails instead of every half hour. We could do it every 10 minutes, and if that wasn't enough, every 5 minutes, and it really wouldn't impact the system. So this is why looking at customers is so important. It's starting to get people to think beyond their group and how to provide better service. Now, often some of the solutions are very tactical, but this is beginning to think about the customers so that as they get higher in the organization, they start also thinking about external customers and their needs and preferences, and really focusing on what it is we need to do and perhaps need to do differently to really meet their needs. And in this way, the customer service module is important to enhancing strategic thinking skills.
Denise, you make a really important point that customers are not only external, but also internal, and that sometimes people lose sight of their internal customers. What about looking inside the department?
Tom, that's a great point, and that brings us to the third module that we put in, and that is what are the top 4 strengths and top 4 weaknesses of the department. So in the fourth module, or the first one we discussed, we talked about the importance of looking at customers and looking outside the department on who the customers are. They could be external to the company, but they could be internal to the company, but outside the department. It's also important to understand what's going on inside the department. Now, typically what people do when they do strengths and weaknesses is they just develop these long laundry lists of this is what we're really good at and this is what we're not so good at. And they aren't really very helpful because you're not bubbling up what's most important. So our suggestion is you ask each department to come up with what they think are their top 4 strengths and their top 4 weaknesses. And once they've done that, and some of the great part of this is that the discussions that happen among the department, because these are people who haven't always had to prioritize what's important, and they haven't always had to negotiate because what you think is important may not be the same thing as someone else, and you need to explain why what you think is important as a strength or a weakness and why it is. And this communication is paramount to working as a team. Now, once you have those top 4 strengths and weaknesses, you need to assign how important each one is. And then you talk about what's critical, what's important, and what's beneficial. Additionally, you need to rate each strength and each weakness in terms of your performance. So your strengths will typically be where you're excellent and good, and your weaknesses are sometimes where you're poor and abysmal. But it's not unusual for someone to be looking at a weakness, and then as you really talk through it, you're actually pretty good at it. Now, that doesn't mean you may not still want to enhance it, but it allows you to have a really good discussion as a team after what we're good at and what we're not so good at, but by forcing people to prioritize it into the top 4, that causes us to really be thinking. And that's the reason why the critical, this module, Strengths and Weaknesses, is important, because the prioritizing of what's important rather than just developing laundry lists is a critical strategic thinking skill.
Denise, you brought up an important point that is overlooked in many strategic planning sessions. Focus on the most important rather than looking at the laundry list. When people are able to prioritize, then the company is much more focused on key areas.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And that brings us to our next module, which is opportunities. So now each one of your departments has had the opportunity to think through who are our customers and what do they want in a perfect world, and then what are our department's strengths and weaknesses. Now they have a chance to think through what are the new opportunities we should be working on. So often within departments, the focus is on the day-to-day. This gives each department a chance to think about the big picture. So how do you do this? Well, you ask them to come up with the new opportunities they'd like to pursue in the next year. And this could be anything around how can we become more efficient? How can we become more customer-focused? How can we better support the overall strategy, goals, and objectives? Once the team comes up with their list, and typically their list will be about 10 to 12 when you do this on a department basis, you once again want them to think through not just a list of things, but how important are they? So you want them to take each opportunity and rate it in terms of what's its contribution to the company if we pursue this opportunity and we're successful. Is it high? Is it moderate? Or is it low? Then what's the contribution to the department if we pursue this opportunity and it's successful? Is it high? Is it moderate? Or is it low? So that's really getting people to think about where the contribution is, not only to our specific department, but how will it impact the overall company. But then you not only have to think about the opportunity and if it's successful, you have to look at the probability of success. So something may be a great opportunity and really contribute, but if it's something that's going to be too hard for us to accomplish, it's just too big or we don't have the technology right now, it may not be a good choice. So we have the teams rank these in terms of probability of success and achieving the contribution to the overall company or the department. And then we assess the resources required. Because in an individual department, you have all the day-to-day things that you're responsible for delivering. So you don't have tremendous amounts of time to work on lots of projects. So we ask you to think about the resources required so you can skinny the list down and truly eventually select what it is you need to work on. And that takes us into the final module, where you choose those 1, 2, or 3 projects that you want to work on. Notice I don't say more than that, because if you choose too many projects, you might do a little bit of work on a lot of projects, but you'll get nothing done, and it'll be really frustrating. So we suggest that it's just 1, 2, or 3. So how does this work? You have the team nominate possible projects. You have the team discuss merits of each project. And then you have the team vote on those 1, 2, or 3 projects that they're going to work on to ideally finish in the next 12 to 18 months. Once you've selected those projects, you then want to develop metrics to see if you accomplish this project, what will you achieve? What will you achieve in efficiency? What will you achieve in enhanced customer satisfaction? Then you need to take these projects and tie them back to the overall corporate strategy, goals, and objectives to make sure they are consistent with what we're doing in the big picture. Now, you could stop here, but part of these projects, you have to do a couple more steps to make sure you turn these projects into action. You need to teach the teams how to develop action plans. So in order to achieve these action steps, the action plans, what are the key action steps that need to occur? Who is responsible for each step? So it's not a mystery. If something doesn't happen, you have somebody to go to and say, where are we on this? And then how much time will each step take? And right at the end of the strategic alignment session, you start each department working on action plans so that they can actually move the company forward based on the projects that they've selected. You know that these projects have tied back to the strategy or the goals or the overall strategic initiatives we've chosen, but that they walk out of the meeting with at least the start of a clear roadmap to turn these projects into action. So it's very important now that we think through alignment, because developing a strategy gets everyone on the same page, gets the senior management team on the same page. But if we don't communicate the strategy to the rest of the team, we're not going to get that alignment and really getting everybody rowing the boat in the same direction. So don't leave alignment to chance. Understand that just communicating I talk, you listen isn't going to get the buy-in that you'd like. Two-way communication is very important, that you get that buy-in. And as I discussed in the first story I told you about when I was running a financial services firm, you can do a very simplistic approach to alignment where you have people just report back what they're going to do in support of the plan. But we found an overall alignment program that takes about a day, allows the department to really connect the dots and really enhance their strategic thinking skills, and helps with professional development. We recommend 4 modules, although there are other choices depending upon where your team is. The modules we found are most important is for your team, each department, to identify who its customers are, and then what the customers want in a perfect world. That's looking externally outside the department, even though some of the customers may be internal to the company. Then take a look within the department. What are our strengths and weaknesses, so that we can come up with the top 4 strengths and weaknesses and truly understand what we're good at and what we're not so good at, rather than developing a big laundry list of possibilities and not being able to focus on the areas that we really need to enhance. Next, you've looked at what's going on outside your department, what's going on inside the department. You need to look at the key opportunities we might be working on in order to move things forward. And once again, we don't just want a laundry list. You have to take the list and sort it in terms of contribution to the overall company, contribution to the department, whether or not it's hard to do, so the risk involved in it, the probability of success, and then finally the resources required. When you have these opportunities, you then need to go to the final module and the most important module, and that's culling that list down to the 1, 2, or 3 projects you want to accomplish in the next 12 to 18 months. These projects need to be tied back to the overall corporate strategy, goals, and objectives. And having these projects on a list isn't enough. You need to turn these projects into action plans, and action plans will have action steps, who's responsible, how much time, and then review them by management to make sure this is all consistent with the overall strategic direction and that we can allocate the resources to this project. Now, part of alignment success is making sure you have a strategic plan with a focus on the top priorities. In order to make sure you need to be sure that your strategic planning process has research so that you make fact-based decisions, and that you make balanced decision-making so that you not only have the resource, but you get input from a lot of people from the finance area, people representing the customers, people representing operations. But you make these decisions not discretely on one project. You make these decisions based on all the possible choices at once, so you can really prioritize. And that, of course, goes to the making choices and selecting the few strategic initiatives to work on. Now, before this workshop, a number of you emailed me and said that you are having problems with a tight strategy. So if you don't think your strategic planning is really setting you up to make good decisions, you don't have a consistent approach, you find that people are just making decisions based on top-of-mind thinking rather than full research, or you lack a lack an analysis funnel, which constantly drives you to choosing a few things rather taking the many and then going to choose the few things. You may need to tune up your strategic plan, because as you go into strategic alignment, the basis of your overall strategic alignment is having a cohesive strategic plan. And as you're asking your departments to align with your plan, you're going to find they're going to ask a lot of questions about your strategy. And if your strategic planning process is very tight and very thought out, you can show them a clear path to how you made your decisions. If it's not, it's going to be more difficult to explain. So based on receiving some questions about getting that strategy tightened up, and of course that's, if you have a tight strategy, it's much easier to communicate, we've decided to offer our strategic planning seminar for people who attend this webinar for a special price. So we can't teach strategic planning in an hour webinar, and we apologize for that. But we do have a 2-day public simplified strategic planning process, and this is the special rate. It's $900 off. And here's the link that if you click to, you can sign up for this. Now, if you're listening to an archived version of this presentation, you can call Elizabeth Tidd, our seminar coordinator, and here's the phone number, and she'll be able to give you this price. But you need to call her and sign up for a specific seminar, and she'll be able to give you this offering. Some of you want to do a deeper dive. We can, of course, do that with either a full in-house workshop or full process consulting. So if you want to do an even deeper dive. But really, we feel the simplified strategic planning will get most of you on your way to developing that really tight strategy that you need. So just to summarize, strategic alignment is important to your strategy's success. In order to have a good alignment, you need a tight strategy. We suggest you have your departments think through who their customers are and what they need in a perfect world. Additionally, take a look at strengths and weaknesses inside the department and have them prioritize the top strengths and the top weaknesses. Next, look at what projects they'd like to look at. So what are the opportunities? But once again, don't develop a laundry list. Look at the contribution to the overall company and department and assess the resources. And finally, select those 1, 2, or 3 projects that you'd like to implement, and then turn those projects into action by developing action plans. We've covered a lot of material. I'm sure you must have some questions. So there is a question box, and if you'd like to type in your questions, Tom's going to field them and read them to me. Tom, any questions? Have there been any typed in yet?
We have a couple of great questions that have come in already. Maybe some others will follow. Here's the first one. Is there anything you can do to get people focused on the big picture? My team is always in the weeds.
Excuse me. Yes, the big picture is sometimes hard to get people focused on, and we have another module, and this is one we didn't talk about. And this is a really fun one to work on when you're really trying to raise people up and think about the big picture. So rather than having people in the departmental groups, you split the teams up so that they're cross-functional. And you ask them this question: what are the trends facing our industry and our customers' industry looking out 5 to 10 years? So that's beyond your normal planning horizon, but we want to get people thinking out further than next month. And what's fun about the cross-functional teams is they all come from different points of view, and this is a great sharing and team building time. Once each team has developed their industry scenario, they present it back to the rest of the group. So each team is presenting back their industry scenario. And you're going to find some of these teams get really pretty creative, and that's what we're looking for. After the presentations are done, you then ask each group, once again, these are the cross-functional groups, and you ask them now, what are the characteristics of the winning organization looking out 5 to 10 years? And this gets people focused on what are the things that we as a company really need to focus on to position us for the future. So this module is a lot of fun, and if you find your team really needs to look at the big picture, that's the module that I'd add.
Here's a second question, Denise. Is there anything you can do to really pull the creativity out of the group? Our focus is innovation.
Yes, there also is an innovation module that you can add. And it's funny, just a couple weeks ago I was working with a team in Canada, and their CEO came to me and said, Denise, this team, we just don't think outside of the box. I'm thinking up of setting up a whole new group of people, a skunk works, so we can get some innovative thinking in the company. And I said, John, really? That's a little surprising, because usually people do come up with some good thinking. So we added an innovation module, and there are a couple ways to do this. But what we did with this team was we took each one of our customer segments, and we had each one of, and we did this cross-functionally also, we had the groups rotate around and think through for each of our market segments what are the things we could do for the segments? And of those ideas, what's a single? What's a double? What's a home run? And we were amazed. The team came up with 70 different ideas. And of course then, you know, we talked about just having laundry lists. We had to cull that down to the top 10 through a screening process. But he was amazed. He had never really given the team a chance to think it through and think it through from the customer's perspective. Now that's one way you can do it. Another way you can do it is to select, to talk about your strategic competency. So those are the skills that differentiate you in the marketplace, and think through where else can you use those skills. So if you think about Honda, its strategic competency is small, efficient engines. And of course, they first developed motorcycles, but now look at all the things that they've developed. They've developed generators, they've got jet skis, they've got lawnmowers, they've got snow blowers. So just taking that one competency, they've then used it into a whole nother set of areas. And that's another thing you can do, is look at that key differentiating feature. Additionally, you can look at, can we take our existing products to new markets? Or can we provide new products and services to our existing customers? Additionally, you can look at pain points. What are the pain points? How can we solve these pain points for our customers and become more integrated into their process? So earlier I was talking about looking at strengths and weaknesses, and one of the groups found that customers wanted to know the status of their orders, and we talked about how the financial department working with the IT department had developed a report so that the customer service people could answer these questions more easily. Well, a step further in that process would be enabling your customers or your large customers to sign on to the system and be able to have that visibility to them, to their orders, so they could see it themselves. And that way they could do it whenever they wanted, and they wouldn't have to wait for a customer service person to answer the phone and answer their question. So there are lots of ways we can develop an innovation module. But if you're looking for innovation, that is one of the things you can do in your strategic alignment process, and it's a lot of fun. Any other questions?
I think that's going to put a wrap on it, Denise. There may be some other questions out there, but they haven't come in, so we need to define that as the end of the questions.
All right. Well, if any of you have additional questions that you'd like to ask me, please feel free to call me. I'm sure we can help you design a program that'll meet your company's needs. And once again, I'd like to reiterate our offer. If the first step, that strategic plan, is really not, you don't feel it's quite tight enough, we'd like to make that offer to attend our seminar. And if you're listening on the archive, please just give Elizabeth a call, and she'll be happy to accommodate you, get you into a seminar, and get you in at this webinar special price. Thank you very much.